Just literally 2 days ago, I found out there is such a thing called FebRegency, started by YouTuber Bookish Princess. I don't know how I haven't heard of this in the last couple of years that she and some of her other booktube friends have been doing it, but I am so glad I found out. I thought I'm going to contribute. So this is my first video for Feb Regency 2024. And the other channels that are involved, like I said, are the Bookish Princess and Dostoevsky in Space, Ms. Richards Reads, and Tristan and the Classics. And for Feb Regency in 2024, we have a book that we can read along, and there are plans to be a discussion at the end of the month. That book is Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth. I think I actually heard somewhere that she was a writer who inspired Jane Austen, which is actually pretty cool. I started reading Belinda about 2 days ago, and it's definitely got that slower pace of a real Regency. But that's fine. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I can definitely see the echoes and hints that remind me of Jane Austen. So that's very fun too. I love the idea that even great writers like Jane Austen are inspired by others. I mean, that's something we should all do, right? Inspire others. And there's four what they're calling challenges for for you to do if you want to join in Feb Regency. And Bookish Princess, her challenge is to read a book from the Regency era that involves naval journey or travel by sea. And for the purposes of Feb Regency, we're using the bigger spread of time for what Regency means. For the in the strictest sense, Regency time in England was between 1811 and 1820. From the time that the person who would become King George the Fourth, he actually took over because his father had mental illness, George the Third, and so he took over as the regent, as like the acting ruler, but not the official king at that point. And the Regency, the official Regency, the true Regency period, ended in 1820 when his father actually died, and the regent then became the king, King George the Fourth. But for a variety of reasons, the greater Regency era is seen as between 1795 and 1837. That kind of starts the 1795 kind of starts the unofficial time when George the Fourth had to step in for George the Third, but it wasn't official, as in an act of parliament official way, until 1811. And then the reason to extend it all the way up until 1837 is that's when Queen Victoria then came on the throne. And George the Fourth was king until he died, I think, just about a decade or so later. And then one of his younger brothers became became king for just a short amount of time. And then when Queen Victoria was 18 and the prior king passed without any legitimate children, then she became queen when she was 18. Probably a little more Regency history than you care for, but I thought it was a good thing to explain what we're calling Regency for this Feb Regency event. And let's see, Dostoevsky in Space, their challenge for Feb Regency is to read historical fiction set during the Regency period. So this, to me, this opens it up for what I'm going to be sharing in just a few moments. Emily Larkin writes really fantastic and oftentimes fantastical Regency romance. And she's a contemporary woman. She's living now. She's still writing books. But she sets her historical fiction in the Regency period. So I'm going to spotlight her because I've only recently found her. She's been new to me since summer of 2023. But as soon as I read her first book, I absolutely fell in love with it. And I've now read, I think, 13 books of hers, and And I think she's literally the only author I have given 5 stars on Goodreads for every single one of her books. I tend to be a very strict Goodreads reviewer. The way they used to do the stars back in the day, you could actually see when you rolled over them what Goodreads called them and what they said for 5 stars. Was it "It's incredible" or something like that? I'm like, hardly anything rises to that bar for me. So usually my Goodreads reviews get 1 star less than my Amazon reviews. But I just love her books. So literally 13 books of hers have gotten 5 star reviews from me, and I think my average rating is 3 point something. So props to that. All right, to continue with the challenges from the people who are running the show for FebRegency, Ms. Richard, Miss Richards reads, is any new to you actual Regency author? That's kind of a fun thing because there's definitely some people out there that, even though I absolutely adore any kind of Regency book, whether it's modern or old, I haven't I haven't read. And actually the book that's the spotlight book, Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth, that's a new author to me. So I'm kind of fulfilling that role. If I have more time, I already have another author kind of lined up that I'd like to read as a part of this challenge. Susan, I'm sure you pronounce it, Susan Ferrier, who is actually a Scottish Regency author. So if I have some time, I'm gonna slot that in for that challenge. And then the YouTuber Tristan and the Classics, his challenge is actually a non-reading challenge, and I think that's fun. It adds a bit of fun to this. His is to learn and engage in a Regency pastime or arrange an evening of Regency games with friends. And that's fun. I mean, if you've read any Regency books, whether they're modern or written back in the day, there's lots of things that they do. Card games are definitely a function. Music evenings at home, um, different foods. You can have so much fun with that. I have some limited resources. I don't have a lot of friends who live locally who would probably appreciate a sort of a Regency evening or would want to play Regency games. But I started looking into Regency music because I actually play the harp and the piano, actually, which are two instruments that were very popular back in the Regency era. Though I play a Celtic harp, not a traditional symphony kind of official classical musical harp. And most of the songs I looked at yesterday, I'm like, oh, these might be a bit difficult. Although I'm going to try some Scottish airs. I'm going to try some of those. At least those look relatively easy. But what I thought I'd do, if I can't actually learn how to play a Regency song, I can actually listen to them on YouTube. And so I did some research last night, and I found a couple different and actually fantastic composers who I hadn't really heard of. I mean, certain people become popular at certain times, but that doesn't mean there's not other people out there without talent. And so I found one who I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, so I'll probably be mispronouncing it. Ignaz Playel. And they actually has a nice couple playlists here on YouTube, and I'm just like, this is actually good stuff. And there was one on one of the playlists, the first one played, I'm like, I've heard that song before. I've heard that in places. I just didn't know that Ignaz Playel wrote it. And Playel is Pleyel. Again, I'll put a link in the description to the playlist because I've enjoyed it. Although not everything is actually Playel, but at least the first couple ones are. I saw some Mozart sneak in there, that sort of a thing. When I was researching what Regency music was, I actually found one that talked about like Jane Austen and music of her time. She actually, from what this article said, she was an accomplished musician. She played the piano daily, and when she died, she left behind like 8 volumes of music, uh, sheet music. Some of it bought, some of it that she obviously would have copied from friends because back in the day, buying sheet music was very expensive. And so, in that article, they said that she was more apt to play what we would now consider to be the lesser lights or those who've been forgotten in time. They might be fantastic composers, great songs, but we don't we don't think of them now. We think, oh, classical music. We think Haydn, we think Bach, we think Beethoven, Liszt, Mendelssohn. Da, 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 da. We don't think Pleyel. Yeah, I'd never heard of him before, and I like classical music. And apparently, she also had, and I think you would know this from her book, she had quite the sense of humor. So she actually, there was this one person, I can't remember the first name, but the last name is Dibdin. I think he was English, yeah. And he wrote plays, he wrote 1400 songs, but the article referred to him as like the Benny Hill of the Regency era. So a lot of humorous songs. I could find some of his lyrics, but I couldn't find the actual music. But I love the idea that Jane Austen liked to play funny songs or even body songs, because that was actually one thing that was surprisingly allowed back in the Regency era. Well, there was a lot of strictures about how a woman could act and how she could approach others and all sorts of rules along that. For some reason, like for their music nights, they gave the ladies a little leeway, at least according to this article that I read online. And basically, women could even sing like bawdy songs, especially if they affected an accent so that they didn't sound English. And in fact, and I'll admit the Scottish part of my heritage feels a little offended by this, but if they sang a bawdy song in a Scottish accent, it was okay. That's, like I said, offends the Scottish part of my soul, but I've got English in there too because hey, I'm an American, so I've got lots of different European blood in my system. But how funny that they would allow that so long as they kind of covered it up, like it's not really me. All right, as you might be able to tell, I could go on and on about this stuff because, frankly, I love it. That's why I call this channel for the love of old books and old times because I think this is fun. I mean, the real world, as we all know, can be unpleasant at times. We just recently got off that long patch together that we suffered through the pandemic. So hey, let's enjoy other times, other places, and wherever we find joy, it's all good. So let me get to my discussion of this delightful contemporary modern Regency author. She actually writes both Regency stories and occasional fantasy books. And some of her Regency books actually incorporate a paranormal element, which I think is so fun. I like to read speculative fiction too. And so how fun to combine it. She actually has this greater umbrella series called the Baleful Godmother. There's actually several series within it, like two series have to do with two different sets of cousins in the same family. But all of the books in that series have the touch of the paranormal. And there's actually an origin story. I'll go over all this stuff, some of it briefly, some of it in more detail. Actually has an origin story set more like in like imagine fantasy medieval England, where this family has essentially gained a boon because of the great things that they did for a fae woman. And the fae in this series is definitely not the tall, handsome or beautiful fairies who fae who want to spread cheer and goodwill and act on the side of right. No, that's the reason why it's called the Baleful Godmother. This this Fey woman is pretty nasty and as a golem might say, a bit tricksy and false at times if she can get away with it. And some of the books have more of this fantasy element than others, but it's all there, whether it's kind of like low key or if like it's a major part of the story. But it all works. She makes it work. She's got some mad skills for both fantasy and for Regency. I read a lot. I read so much. Every bit of time while I'm eating, after I get home from work, whenever I can squeeze it in, I'm reading. Excuse me. And often it is Regency. And so I know at least for my opinion, I know good Regency from bad. And unfortunately, because Regency is so popular today, my goodness, we just get a spate of terribly, terribly written books where authors are just more interested in making money than putting out a good story. I mean, I'm not opposed to making money. We all need to survive, and props to you if you can actually survive financially with a creative pursuit, but you got to put out quality. At least that's my opinion. And some people just don't know how to write, or they kind of blend in their head um, contemporary elements and historical elements, not respecting that if you're going to write a historical romance, A, you should know the history, and B, don't throw in, phrases or concepts that would have just been not even known back then. It, for me, like, it pulls me right out of Regency to sit me to see an author use a phrase like somebody living their best life, or what is it, a party? They describe, instead of calling something like a hostess, like you might have in the Regency era, they call them some sort of party. I can't remember, but like just like wrong words, wrong words. These words would not have been used. These phrases would not have been used. These concepts would not have been used. Anyway, again, I could go on about that. Let's talk about Emily Larkin's absolutely delightful books. All right. So this is Emily's website, which you can get to at emilylarkin.com. This is her book page. She provides other info, but just I'll scroll down this so you can get a sense. So here's her Baleful Godmother series, and the original series, of which I've read all but one. And then there's like these offshoot series, the Garland Cousins, the Pryor Cousins, and that's the prequel to the entire Baleful Godmother series. Then she also has other historical romances that aren't really tied together. Again, I see I've read all but two or three. And that's only just been in the last, like I said, since I said not September, from summer of last year. And this is the Midnight Quill trio, of which I read them. And I haven't actually read her fantasy, although I'll admit I'm interested to see how the quality, how and if the quality continues. And I'm just going to go and show these to you at Goodreads. And I've actually popped up my reviews of each of them. I'm just going to share my reviews for most of them. So, like I said, I've given her like I think she's the only author in the I've been doing reviews heavily since 2019, so that's actually going to be like 5 years. Wow. I've been doing this for 5 years. And in all that time, I don't think I've ever given an author 5 stars, as you can see here. 5 stars on every book that I've actually reviewed. And you can see I wasn't lying. There's all my 5-star reviews, and there's like one more on the next page. But yeah, everything I've read, 5 stars. Never have done that. So props to you, Emily Larkin, for just writing fantastic stories that once I dig into them, I don't want to stop. All right, so let's actually go and talk about some of these books. The first one is for the series. I think this might be the Garland series, the offshoot of the Baleful Godmother. And this book was funny. This book was funny. I look back at it very fondly. As you see, my title for my review is A Squeaking Duke and Intrigue at a House Party. And what makes this book fun is it was just funny. The hero was just such a goofball. And he was just funny. He was humorous. He was amusing. And the reason I put the Squeaking Duke is because, let's say, this is one of the magical series, and Primrose has chosen to be able to just apparate wherever she wants. And so the first time he's there when this happens, he squeaks, and then it becomes like a running gag through the entire book that he's going to squeak whenever she just like shows up. She materializes out of nowhere. It's kind of fun. All right, so I'm just going to share my review and we'll move on to other ones. Let's see. This author is still relatively new to me, but I'm so glad I found her stories. She weaves a complex and fascinating tale every time and has yet to disappoint. And even though we're like 6 months after this review, or 4 months, whatever, I can still say that still has yet to disappoint. I found this particular story exceedingly fun, despite its at times somber undertones. The hero and heroine are an absolute delight, and thoroughly charming, together and apart. They've known each other since childhood and have very opposite personalities, though they ultimately discover their characters are more aligned than they realized. The heroine is a sharp tongued intellectual when we meet as she is rereading and quoting her favorite Marcus Aurelius. And the hero is a happy go lucky new duke, one who didn't think he would become so because he was quite far down the line of those who are going to inherit. Even when we meet them for the first time, we can see the spark between them. She knows not to take him too seriously, despite his new title, and he rather enjoys the way that she simply sees him as Oliver, or Daisy, as she used to call him when they were children, not a duke. And the reason she calls him Daisy is his last name or his title is actually Dazenby. So he's the Duke of Dazenby, or Dazenby's the family name. I can't remember. Um, so that's why she calls him Daisy. I love how the author wove in more quotes from Marcus Aurelius that went really well with the story. At one point, they even revealed to the heroine that there was much more to Oliver than she thought. The bulk of the book takes place at a house party. I think those are always fun for Regency because it it has like a forced proximity element without being too forced. Like, okay, two people are stuck in a cabin, kind of a thing. But it mixes what could be a bunch of different people who may or may not get along with each other, and they may or may not like the activities planned or the food or the whatever. And so house parties are always just fun in Regency. And those hosting it will certainly never live it down. The hero and heroine are there, along with a heroine's brother, who happens to be the hero's best friend, trying to determine if one of his few existing family members is trying to kill him. So that would be Oliver's trying to figure that out. The author did a fantastic job of providing blind alleys, wrong turns, and all those other elements of a good mystery. I did guess early on who the villain was, but I still found it fascinating to see how the characters interpreted the same circumstances as they try to figure it all out. This isn't the only intrigue happening at the house party. The hero and heroine knew of the trying to kill the new Duke aspect before they attended, but another sprang up while they were there. I liked how the hero and heroine worked together to figure this one out and to entrap the villainess. This couple has chemistry in spades, and every time they were together, it was filled with laughter and stolen kisses. The hero's proposal was so sweet and heartfelt. It was clear how much he understood, appreciated, and truly cared for her, making it incredibly touching. Their first intimate encounter was prolonged and absolutely perfect for the two characters. Diana Gabaldon, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, of Outlander fame, has a book on writing intimate scenes, and she describes how characters should be intimate with each other in such a way that the scene couldn't be for any other characters. It is solely their own, matching their characters and their relationship. This first intimate scene between Oliver and Prim was exactly that, so incredibly reflective of who they were as individuals and how they were as a couple. The story has some excellent side characters as well, including Prim's widowed and still hurting brother and Oliver's cousin, Ninian. I hope Rhodes, which is Prim's brother, gets his own story at some point, and perhaps he has, since this is still a relatively new author to me, and I haven't read everything yet. And he deserves some happiness. Ninian was a delight in his own way, a very misunderstood young man who turns out not only to have his own talents, an artistic eye for color and design, but is incredibly loyal and protective. I love how Oliver comes to know and appreciate his cousin during the book. As you may be able to tell, I adored these characters and this story. This, like any other stories by this author that mention Balefire, has a paranormal twist to it. The aspect doesn't overshadow the story or the romance, it only enhances it. In fact, that's where the squeaking duke in the title comes from, as I explained before. Uh, and I didn't let you read the story. That's what I said to in my review. Read the story to find out why. As always in these stories, when the person reveals their magic power, there's a moment when the other person in the couple has to grapple first with believing that it's even possible, and then whether they can accept the person and their growing feelings for them and their hopes for a future despite it. Luckily, in this book, it was not drawn out. Even though this book has magical elements, it's honestly, truly just an excellent Regency story at its core, with this added interest. I highly recommend this book as well as others in the Baleful Godmother series. And if you've read any of my reviews before, you know I'm not usually that long winded, but if I either really like a book or really despise it, I tend to write really long reviews. So this is probably among one of the longer ones that'll be in this set that I'll be going over. But actually, I think the longest review is the one I wrote for the most recent book of Emily Larkin's that I finished, My Lady. All of a sudden I'm blanking. My Lady Thief. That's right, My Lady Thief. That one clocked in at just over 1,000 words. So I think my previous one had been for another Regency contemporary Regency author that clocked in about 900 words. But like as I was writing it, I'm like, this is like a pretty long one. Let's check the word count. 1,007 words. Anyway, we'll be seeing that one in just a few. So that's the first book about Primrose, and the first book in that particular offshoot of the Baleful Godmother. The second book in the Baleful Godmother series about the Garland sisters is Violet and the Bow Street Runner. Again, this is another one I just. Whoop, that's not me. That's somebody else. There I am. I don't have that picture. Let's see. I absolutely adore this one. This was fun in a completely different way, which I get to in the review. All right, so love a beta hero, you'll love Periander. Alpha males are their own particular and very popular trope right now, particularly in contemporary romance. However, I'm more drawn, both in fiction and in real life, to beta heroes. This hero, Periander, a Bow Street runner, is the quintessential and utterly delightful beta hero. Violet is a duke's daughter, and as such, she tends to take command and expect to do whatever she wants without being questioned or thwarted. The hero is certainly at times frustrated with her, but instead of trying to bring the hammer down to keep her in line, they forge an alliance of sorts, while he watches over her in the hopes of keeping her safe, to figure out an odd crime that is happening in the wealthiest of neighborhoods. The hero has been hired to figure this out, and the heroine cannot keep her nose out of this story, out of his business. So he lets her become somewhat grudgingly a part of his investigatory process. This book is a part of the paranormal Regency series Baleful Godmothers, Baleful Godmother, that is exceptionally well done. In it, the females of particular family lines are granted a magical gift at a certain age. It's different for each branch of the family, what age they get granted the magical gift. This heroine chose the ability to fly. She can go places where the hero could not go easily, helping him further his investigation. I love the way she devised a contraption so that they could fly together. It's essentially like a harness that he can get into, and she can take him along. I absolutely adored those scenes, particularly the early ones where the author made it abundantly clear how the hero felt elation, exhilaration, and wonder at being able to fly across the rooftops of London. Their joy was palpable. They also found some interesting places for intimate encounters. Because of the vast differences between their social statuses, I wondered how the story could end up with them being together. I mean, typically back in the day, the man you married, that became your social class kind of a thing. And this guy's a Bow Street runner who lives in a not the best part of town in an upper story in a little teeny tiny room. To say, the difference between a duke's daughter and him, I mean, there's only a few steps lower down he could go to have such a vast difference between their social stations. Let's see. It's kind of what I just said. A woman's social status typically was reflected that of her husband's in the Regency era. The author actually tied it up perhaps a little too neatly, but it worked. I love their interactions. He truly did treat her with the utmost respect for her abilities and her intelligence, as well as her desires, supporting her in what she wanted to do and trying to keep her safe rather than try to hold her back. An utter delight. If you love well written Regency and beta heroes and don't mind, or perhaps will actually enjoy the paranormal aspect, you will probably enjoy this delightful book and series as much as I did. Right. There's only two books in this series, and I wonder if she'll do more, because actually I love these two. These are two fantastic stories. This is another series. This is a separate series from the Baleful Godmother. This is more like straight up traditional Regency. There's not a paranormal aspect in it, and there's three books. This is like kind of the prequel, kind of not, and it's a heart-wrenching emotional story, but I'll just read my review. Can an abused woman find hope and love? In places, this is a hard book to read. The heroine is married to a dreadful, abusive husband who can only gain his pleasure in the marital bed through sadism. Every time, each night. Thankfully, the author does not show us this, but we learn of its results. Like, for instance, before he was going to go off to the West Indies, he beat her so badly that she couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. Horrific, horrific. We cannot help but feel for this beleaguered young heroine who dreads her husband's return from a trip to the West Indies. The entire household knows of his treatment of her, and one even acts as her jailer, as it were, while he's gone. The only time she's allowed away from the manor is to enjoy daily rides when the weather's good. One particular groom is the one who takes her out for her nearly daily rides, and this novella details how they become close during their rides, her growing to trust him despite not wanting to trust a man or anyone because of what she has endured. While the husband is away in the West Indies, they develop a plan to fake her death, emigrate to America, and live as husband and wife. The scenes between them are so heartfelt and eventually steamy. Despite his much lower class rank, he is more of a gentleman than her earl husband. The reader can understand and see quite plainly why the heroine could learn to trust him after all that she's been through. Their sensual scenes are all the more poignant given all that she's been through. If you have any abuse trauma in your past, especially of an intimate nature, this book may be too painful for you to read and enjoy. However, if that sort of trauma is not in your past, the author has portrayed it with a light, deft, sensitive touch, more about the hope for a better future than wallowing in a painful past. Highly recommended. And this one takes place more in the late 1700s, and so it's a generation before the next two books of the series, but it does tie to it, even though these are not the parents of either of the two women who are featured in the next two books. But you can learn that about in my actual review. So this is The Spinster's Secret by Emily Larkin. Wounded warrior finds love and forgiveness. There are three interconnected books in this series. I would call this the core book. Its semi prequel, The Countess's Groom, the one I just read, takes place a generation before this and inspires the author heroine in this book. The lady in that prior book kept a journal that this heroine uses to inspire her titillating tales that have set the beau monde on fire. She is so successful that she's writing her character's memoir. The Tom doesn't know it, but the woman who supposedly writes these scandalous brief glimpses of her life as a courtesan does not exist. She's solely a creature of the heroine author's imagination. As one who has written fiction and nonfiction, I found the writerly aspect of this book fun, as we get a glimpse of the ups and downs as the heroine tries to get the words and story flow to go right. The heroine has big plans for what to do with her royalties. Her uncle's home is not a pleasant place to live, as he is a relatively wealthy miser who wants silent, boiled, tasteless meals followed by hours long religious lectures each night. Her life is certainly constrained, but she sees writing as her way to a better, more independent life. The heroine is also constantly put down for her looks. She's taller than most females and feels deep in her bones that she is plain and unattractive. Her uncle wants to marry her off to an old man in want of an heir because he figures that no man will offer for her willingly. Interestingly, the hero finds her plain when he first meets her, but as he gets to know her, he finds her more and more beautiful, eventually coming to the point where he cannot imagine how he ever saw her as simply plain and unattractive. Aw, we love that in our heroes. How different it is to look at someone through the eyes of love, respect, and deep understanding. If you've ever been made to feel less than because of how you look, you will appreciate how others' opinions have become a part of her down to the marrow of her bones, and will rejoice when she finds someone who loves her just as she is. In this book, we're also introduced to the heroine of the third book of this series, a young widow who's the companion to an elderly female relative who's living in the same house. I'm a sucker for the wounded warrior trope, and this tortured hero is utterly swoon worthy. The hero has returned from the Napoleonic Wars to deliver his friend's artifacts to his family. His friend, the deceased young man, is the heroine's cousin, and he was killed at Waterloo. The hero feels personally responsible for his friend's death, though anyone else would not see it as such. It was just what happens in war, in big battles, just the way it is. The hero was grievously wounded in battle himself, injured in multiple ways, both by the enemy and those on his side, as he was left for dead and like trampled in a charge because his injuries appeared to be so incredibly grave. Because of his scarring and his misplaced guilt, he certainly doesn't feel like a worthy suitor for any woman, let alone a relative of the man whose death he feels so responsible for. His guilt is a deep wound he struggles with daily. And I loved how the heroine guided him to see so many things from a different perspective, including one simple insight that shifts his viewpoint instantly, ultimately helping put him on a path to forgiving himself and living a full life not mired in the past. It was beautifully and touchingly done. This is still a relatively new author for me, and I'm always blown away by the depth of her characterization and the complexity of her plots. Highly recommended. And this one's actually a novella. This is the third book of this series. And it's actually really interesting what the author does. This is The Baronet's Bride. The Baronet's Bride would have been the companion to the elderly female relative in the prior book. Well written novella that tugs at the heartstrings. I've often stated in reviews that I believe the shorter forms of fiction are more challenging to write well than the longer forms. In particular, these days, when so many authors are trying to pump out a novella a month, quality novellas can be a bit scarce. Luckily, this is one of those excellent odds defying novellas. Except for the 5 years later epilogue, which the author calls Afterwards, all the book takes place in the span of just a few hours in one room. A perfectly wonderful way to constrain short form fiction, limit time and or space. Yet character development did not suffer from any word space or setting limits. The author deftly writes deep, complex characters and puts them in situations that allow us and the other characters to really understand what they're about. I've only come to know about this author recently, and I've been very impressed with each book of hers I've read. I read The Spinster's Secret while I was reading this one. This book is a direct spin off of that one, about two of its side characters as its hero and heroine. While your enjoyment of this book would undoubtedly be enhanced by having read the other, you won't suffer from any confusion. Excuse me. I'll admit I started this one first. It's amazing how often I read series books out of order. And then I went back to the other one once I realized how closely they were interrelated. I loved how the author provided a deep backstory that didn't feel like info dumps. We learn about the heroine's somewhat disappointing, very brief first marriage as she writes a letter to her future daughters, providing them with her knowledge and understanding of marriage to this point and specifically about the marriage bed. She does this as she waits for the hero, her new husband, as they're about to begin their wedding night. Similarly, we learn of the hero's past as he prepares for the night, and he's concerned about being able to fulfill his husbandly duties, so to speak. I don't think they ever refer to it like that, but there we go. He's a wounded warrior, relatively fresh from Waterloo, who can't quite wrap his mind around how he will need to change his physical approach to bedding his bride, given his lack of an arm. The author has told the reader critical information about both these characters, but neither character has really broached their concerns with each other, neither wanting to express their vulnerabilities. And frankly, the heroine figures that nothing is going to change if she did. The way she views having sex is she can't imagine it being any different than what she experienced. Over the course of their night together, over the course of the book and their night together, we see them open up to each other not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. As they learn about each other, their trust deepens, making their relationship do so as well. This was just so well done, and I loved reading their interactions, sensing so strongly their compassion, their mutual respect, and their very, very evident love for each other. We rarely see romances starting on the wedding night. They're more about courtship and falling in love. But even though we didn't see that in this book, and you only get a small sense of it in the other book, about how they got to this place, they had clear affection and heartfelt care for each other that made this sweet and heartwarming to read. Though you can imagine that they would probably not always have an easy road ahead, you get the sense in this delightful novella that they will get through anything so long as they do it together and are open and honest along the way. The epilogue was the perfect victory lap. That's how I like to see epilogues. You know, after we've gone through all their hardship as readers, we get to that end bit where we get a glimpse of life a little bit down the road, or sometimes a lot down the road, and we get to see them happy and everybody happy in their world except for the villains who hopefully have gotten their due. And this epilogue shows the couple and their friends 5 years in the future still enjoying each other and their growing families. An absolute delight. Highly recommended. And then I won't actually read this particular review. It's not Regency, and we're doing this for FebRegency. This is actually, as I say in the review title, this is actually the origin story of the entire Baleful Godmother series, called the Fey Quartet because it's actually four novellas within this one book. The woman you see on the cover, I believe, is supposed to be the mom, who whose book is the very first, and she has three daughters. In the first book, they're like approaching the ages that young women would marry, or they one might already be there. And so it's essentially this book has the four stories about the moms, what happens to the mom, and then what happens to the girls. And this sets up, we understand, why this family and the mother and her daughters got the boon from the Fae. And we see how sometimes it didn't really work out well for them, or they have to undo things. And yeah, things aren't particularly easy because this baleful godmother, she's got some claws. This is not a happy, sparkly fairy like you might think of. No, no, Tinkerbell distributing fairy dust, shall we say. Each book starts very similarly, and they definitely have a vibe of kind of like a fairy tale vibe, a once upon a time feeling. And the first parts of the stories are always kind of the same, and then it starts to branch off and gives you more of a sense of what it's going to be like for each particular woman. If you, like, say, read a book or two in the actual Baleful Godmother series and you want to understand its origin story, this is the book you come back and read. Do you have to read it? No, you can completely understand what's going on in this series without it. But for me, what I found is this added depth. It's like, oh, okay. And since I do like speculative fiction, I love this. Is definitely much more paranormal feeling than the rest of the series because yeah, we're actually in this world that's kind of hidden away. It's hard to get into, hard to get out of, except for those that know, and the Fae live very close. So it's definitely got that whole fantasy vibe to it, which I found a lot of fun. So books in the Baleful Godmother series, we already saw a couple from the Garland family. I think the Pryor family will be doing after this. Let's see. So this is Trusting Miss Trentham. And I'm not sure if this was the first one I read in this series or not, but yeah, my title, I Want a Fairy Godmother Ability. This is only my second book of the Baleful Godmother series, and I'm loving it so far. The premise is that women of a particular line are granted a magical wish by a fairy godmother to have a self chosen magical skill for the rest of their lives. In this book, the heroine has chosen to know when she is going to be told a lie, or when she is being told a lie. This is particularly important to her as she is an heiress trying to keep fortune hunters at bay. In this season alone, she's turned down 18 proposals, and the book opens with her 19th. After that failed proposal, she's approached by another man who has heard of her talent for detecting lies, and he would like to use this talent to figure out who betrayed him and his scouts during a crucial battle in the Napoleonic Wars that saw those two scouts killed. She's not sure if she wants to be a part of this, but eventually agrees. The rest of the book shows their very serious adventure trying to figure out who the ultimate betrayer or betrayers are. The heroine has lived a very circumscribed experience, but she really steps out of her comfort zone on so many levels to make all this happen. This will sound silly as something to like in a book, but I like how neither the hero nor the heroine are depicted as drop dead gorgeous or breathtakingly handsome. In fact, when the hero describes what the heroine looks like, he details that she's rather plain and has incorrectly proportioned features. I like it when romance heroes and heroines aren't movie star perfect. It instantly makes them more relatable. Will they figure out who the ultimate betrayer was? Will they find something else along the way between themselves? You'll have to read this book to find out. By the way, this can be read as a standalone without confusion, though once you start this series, you probably won't want to stop. Yep, it's kind of like potato chips. You can't eat just one. And let's see, what's the next one we got? Resisting Miss Merriweather. Swoony, tormented hero. I absolutely adored this story. The hero, as the book opens, is quite a troubled soul. 2.5 years after the event, he continues to punish himself for his actions, becoming a shadow of his former self. His best friend, the man he aggrieved, wants them to start anew, but our hero can't quite imagine doing so. The author takes a little time to tease out precisely what happens, which I think was the right thing to do, because if we knew immediately what he did, we might be prejudiced against him. But his struggle is so agonizing and heartfelt that when we finally learn what started it all, we already see him as a sympathetic character, despite what he did in the past, and perhaps he has actually punished himself enough. The heroine is an unusual young lady, and don't we always love that in our romances? And she is very perceptive about people, something taught to her by her dance instructor father. The hero is so raw in his pain and how he's so self deprecating that you want him to work beyond his issues so he and the charmingly insightful heroine can have a future. He proves his mettle more than once, keeping a cool head when things fall apart, always acting with prudence and compassion. This is one of the Baleful Godmother series books by this author, and in this particular story, the heroine has yet to claim the magical power she desires, though her fateful birthday is coming up soon. What will she choose? What she chose and how she used it is simply perfect. This is still a relatively new author for me, and I'm really enjoying her books. The way she writes descriptions of settings makes you feel like you are there. I used to live at the ocean, not in England or anywhere over there, California, West Coast. The way she writes descriptions of settings makes you feel like you're there. I used to live on the ocean, and the way she describes the shoreline, including the weather, how it makes you feel, what is perceived by the senses, is all spot on. I like how she reveals character through action, speech, and interior monologue. The book is extremely well written and tugs at the heartstrings. Highly recommended. Ruining Miss Rotham. Such an amazing story about a fantastic couple. Though this author has quite the back catalog, she's only a recent find for me. You'll note similar themes. It's definitely. And I am so glad that I have found her. Her stories are not only well researched, which makes this Regency nerd quite happy, but her novels have incredible depth of both character and plot. While I have enjoyed every single book I've read of hers so far, this is, if not my favorite, then in the top two. Its complex plot kept me turning the pages to see what would happen, both for the couple's blossoming relationship at its core, as well as for the external plot. The heroine is so sympathetic, relatable, and believable. She desperately loves her sister, and now that sister has gone missing, so she is determined to find her no matter what. She's very well intentioned, but perhaps doesn't give everything as much thought as she should. Luckily, she finds in the hero a man who will protect her on her quest and help her as much as he can. Now, okay, admittedly, this is certainly an unlikely thing for the Regency era where an unmarried young woman did not run off with a single gentleman, but that just shows the depth of the heroine's concern for her sister and her willingness to do anything to locate her. The book tugs at the heartstrings so many times and in so many ways. The end of her quest is, unfortunately, certainly not what she or the reader wanted it to be, hoped it would be, which brought more than a tear to my eye, but ultimately it ends up beautifully in creating a whole new family. The hero has his struggles as well. He's an illegitimate son of a peer who struggled until his father acknowledged him as a young boy. He sees himself as a bit more of a blackguard than he truly is. He's actually kind, protective, loyal, compassionate, truly the best sort of man, no matter which side of the blanket he was born on. Sometimes he has to protect the heroine from herself, and he goes to great lengths to do the best he can for her. He's the perfect cinnamon roll hero, a little crusty on the outside with a gooey middle, especially when it comes to his lady. He, some while before the book started, asked her father for her hand in marriage, but the old man refused him because of his somewhat tarnished pedigree. One of the running gags, so to speak, of this story is that he asks her every night of their journey to marry him. And it's interesting to see the way her thoughts on this change over time as she gets to know him and he helps her and so what will she do or how will she react when he stops asking? Like all the other books in this series and a few others by this author, a hint of magic pervades the book. A somewhat devious, yeah, very devious, fairy godmother grants women in her line a magical wish for a magical skill. The heroine had dreamed of what she would choose for her wish, but circumstances force her to ask for another. I loved how she used it both in that first critical instance and then later on in the book to actually help save her and the hero. I love how this author has created a believable romantic Regency story, but has included this otherworldly element that fits so well. If you don't mind having a bit of paranormal in your Regency romance, pick up this book and be prepared to be blown away by an amazing story about two wonderful people who deserve each other and the life they eventually plan to create together. Highly recommended. Now I know pretty much in every single one of these ones that has a paranormal twist, I mention it and say that it's well done. These stories are all at their core. They're Regency stories with just this paranormal twist to them. But I've actually read some other authors who have attempted this, and it hasn't gone so well. One is a author, I won't say the name. One is an author that I read as a speculative fiction author, and I loved her book. She had a variety of series. She was always coming out with another one, getting involved with different collections. Loved her stories as speculative fiction. And after Bridgerton, she decided to branch out and do Regency fantasy. But the problem was is that was pretty much her only experience with Regency was Bridgerton. And so the Regency mistakes again, like I said in one of these reviews, I'm a Regency nerd. It's like you got to make this stuff right. The stuff she was saying, I mean, like, oh my god, that came straight from Bridgerton. One of the things that Bridgerton, played fast and loose with the Regency facts. I'm like, oh my god, and here's another one. Oh my god, here's another one. So yeah, I didn't quite like the quote unquote Regency fantasy written by a fantasy writer that I normally like. So I love it that this author just knows how to combine these two and just make it work. You could actually pluck out, for the most part, except for where it really changes the plot, you could pluck it out of the plot, but, and it would still be just like an excellent Regency story. All of these books. Anyway, I could go on. And you say, yeah, you already have. All right, so next one is Discovering Miss Dalrymple. Well described narrative, heartfelt, affectionate romance. I read a lot of Regency romance. Yeah, you're probably getting that vibe already. But this is the first book I've read by this author, and I'm impressed. I loved her narrative descriptions of place right from the first page. That's usually glossed over in romances written these days. So for it to be so well done and evocative moved me and pulled me right into the story. In this beginning scene and throughout the book, the author makes you feel as if you were right there experiencing the beautiful coastal scenes. Another aspect of this book I found absolutely charming is its magical aspect. The heroine and her mother belong to a line of females who are granted a wish to gain a certain power when they turn 23. Her mother wanted to walk on air. The heroine chose the ability to locate simply by asking a question in her mind based on the where. In the short time she's had this ability, she's become quite adept, quite clever at formulating where questions to gain far more information than simply where people or things might have been or may be. Aside from these little magical moments, this reads like a regular Regency romance. The book certainly tugs at the heartstrings when the hero realizes that what he believed he was in his life was are completely different. He struggles trying to wrap his head around what this means for him now and for his future. His past had seemed straightforward before, and his life changed in the span of a heartbeat. Before that fateful moment, he had intended to ask the heroine to marry him and was looking forward to their life together. He also suffers from what we would call now PTSD because of something that happened in his childhood, but they didn't have the words, let alone the treatment for that back then. And because of it, he feels unworthy of her as well. The heroine's father is a fantastic secondary character of surprising depth. He loves his daughter immensely and has come to feel for the hero much as a father does toward a son. His children and the hero grew up together as good friends, so he's known the hero since he was a small boy. The father is fun to watch in his nerdy joy as he looks for fossils and waxes eloquent about them. His compassion toward the hero is sweet and just what the hero needs. I enjoyed this story immensely, and I'm looking forward to reading others by this author. Three more to go. And this one is a part of the Pryor Cousins offshoot from the Baleful Godmother series. And this one's just so much fun. I love Octavius and his friends. All right, so exceptional characterization and plot. Emily Larkin is a new favorite author for me. She simply writes quality Regency romance, both of the standard variety and stories with a paranormal twist. This particular book may be my absolute favorite of hers, and what makes it so wonderful? It's a part of the Baleful Godmother series world, specifically about a line of the family where the males of that branch gain a gift of magical power when they come of age. This is unlike what happens in the other Baleful Godmother series books when the ability to choose a magic ability is passed down strictly in the female lines. This book starts off a little goofy. Octavius and some of his male relations obviously have too much time on their hands as they play a game of running across chairs that have been set up in one of the big rooms, I think at the grandfather's house. Octavius falls off. So the others get to choose something embarrassing to happen to him or that he has to be involved with. The hero has chosen the magical ability to change into any living creature, animal or human. He can't change into a fantastical creature, but he can turn into anything that exists. So his male relatives decide he must spend an evening at Vauxhall Gardens dressed as a woman. The premise of this start could have gone all sorts of sideways with sexism or other inappropriate concepts, but the author walked that fine line very well. The hero soon discovers that Vauxhall Gardens can actually be a very dangerous place for a woman, something he never considered or appreciated as his regular male self. While he and his male relatives are a playful bunch, the hero takes great and deserved affront to what happened to him. And he is determined to make the man who took liberties pay. He also hopes to strike so much fear in the villain that he will be further discouraged from acting inappropriately with other women in the future. A friend of the hero happens to be the villain's children's uncle. His sister was his second wife. So they arrange for that friend to visit the girls and bring along his friend. Otto, which is Octavius's nickname, will be a very ungracious house guest. Yes, he plans to teach the handsy, demanding baron some lessons of how to treat a woman. Of course, it can't be as simple as that, and things take a bit of finessing. Nearly as soon as he meets her, the hero finds himself attracted to the Baron's daughter's governess, Miss Toogood. Funny name for a governess, Miss Toogood. He sometimes has to walk a tight line to juggle all the balls of his visit and charade to keep it all going. Sometimes he takes on a maid's role, and sometimes he's just the regular house guest. He eventually reveals his power to the heroine, and I particularly love this scene where he, as a woman, goes to her chamber so he can actually have a frank discussion with her because, back in the day, she actually would have been ruined if a man entered her bedchamber. She finds this situation a bit awkward as his eyes and facial expressions as a woman are the same as those as a man, but his body and face are otherwise all female. This is one I could definitely visualize as a on TV, on Netflix, on something like that. Just the visual of some of these things described. Loved it. Other lechery goes on in this household, and the seriousness of his quest really comes home to the hero. I loved how the author gave this complexity. I applaud how he staged the villain's come to auto moment, and the villain's reaction just desserts in my book. But it gave the hero pause, which is fantastic. Yes, what the villain did was wrong, and he was inappropriate on more than one occasion, but after everything played out, the hero decides that he doesn't want to be the kind of man who treats another as he did, even in a devil gets his due moment. Fantastic. Putting that moral compass right back in place. And this book certainly does have elements that could trigger people who've suffered any type of sexual trauma, including workplace sexual harassment. I'm not sure how it will look on the bookseller's website, but on the review site where I downloaded this book, the author had a cleverly worded trigger warning. Try saying that one 10 times fast. She states something along the lines that this story is a true bodice ripper and not in a playful or fun way. But not to worry because the villain will get his due. If you haven't had that kind of trauma in your past or know somebody who has, this is an excellent and exceedingly well written story that I highly recommend. Now there's going to be like two one-offs, not a part of the Midnight Quill series, not a part of the Baleful Godmother series. So this is Lieutenant Mayhew's Catastrophes, or as I say it should be titled, The Misadventures of the Lieutenant and His Lady. Though I've read Regency romance for a long time, I'm still relatively new to reading this particular author. I don't know how many times am I going to say that in these reviews. Probably at least one more time. However, I'm certainly glad I have discovered her, as I have found every single story she's written to be an absolute delight, and this book is no exception. After having read the book and coming back to pull up the proper form at the book review site I downloaded it from, it made me realize what the title actually refers to, and it gave me a chuckle in itself. The whole concept of catastrophe, or kittentastrophes, is made into a rather silly pun the characters come back to several times in the story, so nice touch. As with all this author's books, this has delightfully complex characterization that makes the story come alive. And while the romantic trope of forced proximity is certainly a popular one, this author makes it her own in the most delightful ways. This story could be titled The Misadventures of the Lieutenant and His Lady. Both are simply amazing characters whom you want to find their everlasting love together, though at first it certainly looks like theirs will only be a temporary association. The heroine is stunning in so many ways, compassionate and resilient, nearly beyond measure. The bulk of the book is actually what I said earlier. It's a series of misadventures, but the young lady not only takes them in her stride without the merest hint of a swoon, but she actually seems to enjoy her circumstances, no matter what they are. She keeps her spirits up with a smile and a laugh, helping her stalwart companion do the same. She doesn't come across as being too modern, as strong historical heroines often do. Instead, you can understand her strength and personality as the only child of a loving military parents who thrived in that follow the drum environment. The hero is the absolute swoon-worthy one we all love to see in historical romances. A gentle man and a gentleman who's very protective of whoever and whatever he cares about, whether it's two tiny kittens or a young lady whom he barely believes he could dream of calling his own. Even though they only get to know each other over the course of a day, what a day it is. The day's events test their mettle, revealing their character to one another and the reader. I could go on and on about this book, but it's an absolute delight. If you love well written Regency romance, as I do, snap up this book. I doubt you will be disappointed. All right, last one, and the longest one. This is for My Lady Thief. So much more than a lady thief. I read and listen to a lot of Regency romance, so I've actually read a surprising number of stories where the heroine is a thief. I'll admit I held off reading this book for a bit because I just don't, in general, like those kind of stories. While I adore Regency romance, I'm just not a fan of some popular Regency tropes like female thieves or female bare knuckle pugilists. Yeah, I've actually read a few of those, but or started to read. Didn't necessarily finish them. But I should have known this author, my new favorite, would have handled this correctly because she did a fantastic job not only with that theme, but also with these complex characters and their deep backstory. I often lament in my fiction reviews that contemporary writers are prone to the reader dreaded and much reviled info dump. It's particularly problematic in short form fiction like novellas, but some authors rely on this horrid technique, and I'm putting my own air quotes in, but you can't see them, to get the reader quickly filled in and onto the main story. The book didn't have that, and in fact, she very slowly reveals the backstories of this couple's relationship and their own personal histories. So slowly that we don't really have the full picture of the heroine's life, her early life especially, until near the end of the story. That takes skill to do well and to really pull it off, which happened here. And it truly was perfect timing as we learn along with the hero what happened to the heroine in her early life. And it only makes us appreciate the strong and resilient woman she clearly showed herself to be throughout the rest of the book. I won't give too much away, although, of course, I say this at the beginning of a review that's like 1,000 words long. I won't try to give too much away, but let's just say that these two have a bad history, one that has shaped the heroine's adult life for the last 7 years. She was born the daughter of a peer's non heir son. I think he might have been son 3, son 2, son 3. Can't remember. For the last 7 years. And, oh, wrong line. Non heir son and a woman described or descended from French nobility. Because his parents didn't sanction the marriage, they turned their son's widow away after their son died. Yes, they would take in their granddaughter, but they had no interest in keeping the small family unit intact. After this rejection, the heroine's mother, her circumstances went from bad to worse until she and her mother were living in the worst London slums, and her mother was doing anything to make money to keep them going, to keep them alive, to keep a roof over their heads. Yes, and I do mean anything. After her mother's death, her grandfather did take her in when she was around 12 or so. But the hero ruined her first season a few years later, and in drunken state, he put her down in such a colorful manner that the name Miss Smell o' Gutters followed her ever after. But this young woman would not be cowed, and she determined that she would hold her head high in society, even though she knew she would never be fully welcomed or accepted or a part of the best circles, even if she was a peer's granddaughter. She is truly kind, decent to the marrow of her bones, and even protective, especially of other young women whom she believes the Ton is treating poorly, including, at the start of the book, the hero's half sister. The heroine passes along her hard won wisdom to this young lady who's been on the verge of cutting her first season short because of rumors and the potential for scandal. Despite her and the hero's history, she doesn't think twice about helping this young woman who is clearly struggling. How can you not admire that? But as the title says, not just suggests, the lady is a thief. But she's more of a thief in the sense of Robin Hood, but with a delicious twist. Not only does she give her ill gotten gains to a charity she's funded to help young women in the slums climb out of the pit of poverty and become properly trained for decent jobs, but her targets are people who are behaving badly outside of the light of society. We meet our heroine as she's burgling a woman who is blackmailing the hero's sister. Not only does she take some jewelry to contribute to her charitable cause, but she is also able to find drafts of the blackmail letters as well as the jewelry the villainess connived to acquire. As you may imagine, given their history, the hero is not wild about any sort of relationship developing between the heroine and his sister, but his sister and even her companion aunt quickly warm to the young lady. As he watches her interaction with his sister, he comes to have a grudging respect for the heroine and her effect on his sister, and in fact, starts to feel quite guilty about what transpired between them between all those years ago. I love that this is a true enemies to lovers story. It's an exceedingly popular trope these days in both historical and contemporary romance. But some writers barely make them true enemies. Like maybe he pulled her hair, tripped her on the way to the school bus, or something like that. I've actually seen that first one, and she never got over it. The basis for their friction was harsh, and it truly changed the heroine's life. Their push me, pull you down dance as they got to know each other, sometimes a bit begrudgingly, was entertaining. It was fun to watch. And you could see their growing admiration and respect, even if they both kind of fought it at times. The end of the story revealed so much more, not just about the heroine's history, but also her sometimes fractious relationship with her grandmother. I was reading this book as I was eating lunch at a favorite restaurant. That's what I do on my days off, on the weekdays when I can. Go and hang out at a restaurant, leisurely eat food while I'm reading my delightful books. It's amazing how often in these last, like since July of last year, how often it's been this lady's books that I've been reading at my favorite restaurants. And so as I was saying there before, I had my own little tangent. So I was eating lunch in my favorite restaurant when I came to the scene where we discover more about the grandmother's past and how things transpired for her back when the heroine was a little girl. It was all I could do to keep from bursting into tears right at the table. I love a book that legit brings the feels, even if it could get embarrassing. I could seriously go on and on about how delightful this book is. And you say, yes, but too late. How complex the characterization is, and how well it shows how trauma of different types can leave deep wounds that require work and understanding to unravel and allow you to live the life you deserve to live. But if you choose to read this book, and I hope you do, I'll let you discover that for yourself. All right, so that wraps up my exploration of this delightful and amazing author. If you have any interest in reading contemporarily written Regency romance, if you don't mind or would perhaps really enjoy the paranormal twist, check out this author. She's like available on all the big places. I've seen her on Amazon, Apple Books, Kobo, Barnes and Noble. Of course, you can read other reviews at Goodreads and um, BookBub. So she's out there all over the place. Um, I honestly can't recommend them high enough. As you might have noticed, I'm super fussy about the books that I read. I've I've been a reader for decades. I mean, I've been reading since I was 7 years old, and I'm 56. So I've been reading voraciously. I'm a voracious reader for like what 40 plus, almost 50 plus years, and so I'm fussy. I know what I like. I know what bugs me, like info dumps. I know what I love, complex characters and plots, deep backstories. And this author delivers on all the things that matter to me. If those kind of things matter to you, check her out. I'll drop some links down below for you to access the books directly, to read a bit more about her as an author, all that good stuff. And I'm planning to do more FebRegency videos. I'm hoping to do one later tonight and one tomorrow. Hope to have 3 done this weekend. Come back to the channel, check it out, and as always, as I like to say, thanks so much for watching. If you love old books and olden times like I do, please come back and see what other things I'm going to share. I'm looking forward to sharing more with you.